You ever get the feeling there's a hidden pattern to history? Some kind of invisible script that empires follow from ancient Rome all the way to our world today? Well, let's dive into this, because it turns out there just might be a cycle, one that's about 80 years long, and it might explain way more than you can possibly imagine. But first, let's just ask ourselves a question. What does the fall of an empire actually look like when you're living in it? I mean, we tend to picture it as this one big, dramatic event, right? But the truth is, the people living through it, they rarely see the signs. They just think, wow, this is a rough patch. Things will get back to normal eventually. Let's take ancient Rome as an example. Their reserve currency, the denarius, it started out as almost pure silver. But hey, running an empire is expensive, so each emperor had the same choice: either cut spending or quietly, reduce the amount of silver in each coin. And they always chose to debase the currency, to just kick the problem down the road. Nero shaved it down to 90%. A century later, it's 75%. And by the time Gallienus is in charge, it was just 5% silver. It was basically a bronze coin with a thin silver coating that just wore right off. And this is where the story kind of holds up a mirror to our own time, and it gets a little spooky. Rome debased its silver-backed currency. America took the dollar off the gold standard in 1971. Rome had massive military overreach. Today, the U.S. has over 800 military bases around the world. Rome used bread and circuses to distract everybody. We have consumer culture and social media. And Rome funded its debts by hollowing out its coins. The U.S. funds its $34 trillion debt through quantitative easing, which, let's be honest, is just a fancy modern term for printing money. The pattern is, well, it's pretty hard to ignore. So, you might be asking, after the US ditched the gold standard, what actually gave the dollar its power? Well, a brand new system was created back in the early 1970s. It's called the petrodollar. The deal was pretty simple. The US would offer military protection to oil-producing nations, and in return, all global oil sales would have to be priced exclusively in US dollars. This created this permanent artificial global demand for the dollar. Pretty clever, right? Okay, so this system is literally the bedrock of America's economic power. So what happens when a country tries to, just opt out? Well, the first major test came from Saddam Hussein in Iraq way back in the year 2000. The sequence of events here is, well, it's pretty stark. In late 2000, Saddam announces Iraq is no longer accepting dollars for its oil. He switches all sales to the euro. A little over 2 years later, the U.S. invades, citing weapons of mass destruction that, as we all know now, were never found. And one of the very first decisions made by the new U.S.-backed government, you guessed it, switching Iraqi oil sales right back to U.S. dollars. And the pattern just keeps going. In 2009, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed something that was honestly even more ambitious. See, he wasn't just talking about switching currencies. He wanted to create an entirely new one. He was pushing for a pan-African currency called the gold dinar. The plan was for African and Muslim nations to sell their oil and all their other natural resources exclusively for this new gold-backed currency. I mean, this would have given these nations total monetary sovereignty, completely bypassing the dollar and the euro, the whole shebang. Then, in 2011, a NATO-led military intervention starts in Libya. Leaked emails from the Secretary of State at the time later showed that Gaddafi's gold reserves and his big plan for an alternative currency were known factors influencing that intervention. Not long after, Gaddafi was overthrown and killed, and his plan for the gold dinar, it died right there with him. So here's the crucial point, this pattern we're seeing. Iraq challenges the dollar, it faces an invasion. Libya challenges the dollar, it faces an intervention. And countries like Iran, which have sold oil and other currencies for a long time, they face decades of just crippling sanctions and this constant pressure for regime change. Now look, correlation isn't causation, right? But a pattern this consistent, it's really hard to ignore. So why do these patterns keep repeating? This brings us to a really fascinating, though I should say contested theory called the fourth turning. The basic idea is that history moves in cycles of about 80 years. The Romans actually had a word for this, a saculum, which means the length of a long human life. And each of these cycles ends in a major crisis that tears down the old order and builds something completely new. And if you look at American history, these huge, order-defining crises seem to show up with this eerie regularity. You have the American Revolution, then, about 82 years later, boom, the Civil War. About 81 years after that, World War II. And 81 years after that brings us, well, it brings us right here to the mid-2020s. According to the theory, we are living in the next crisis window. But why 80 years? What's the magic number? Well, the reason is actually profoundly human. It's something called the grandparent problem. The cycle is 80 years long because that's about how long it takes for the generation that actually lived through the last great crisis, the people who truly understood the cost, to pass away. Their kids heard the stories. Their grandkids kind of remember. But their great-grandchildren, they have no living connection to that catastrophe. And so the warnings just go unheard, and the same mistakes become possible all over again. And you can actually see the signs of this cycle turning in the data. The dollar's share of global reserves held by central banks around the world, it's fallen from over 70% at the turn of the century to about 58% today. It's a slow but absolutely unmistakable erosion as countries start to diversify away from the dollar. But, and this is a huge but, here's the paradox. While those reserves are diversifying, the dollar is still the absolute king of transactions. It's involved in nearly 88% of all global foreign exchange trades. So while its status as a store of value is slowly weakening, its role as the medium of exchange is still overwhelmingly dominant. For now, anyway. And you have to appreciate the ironic evolution of the dollar itself. I mean, look at this. It was backed by gold, then by nothing, then it was propped up by oil, and now in this truly bizarre twist, the US government has started to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, accumulating an asset whose entire reason for existing is that no government can print it. It kind of seems like they're hedging against the very same debasement pattern we saw in Rome. This historical pattern of controlling key resources isn't going away. It's just changing commodities. The geopolitical battles of this century might not be about oil, but about the stuff that powers the green energy and tech revolutions. We're talking about lithium for batteries, cobalt from the Congo, and rare earth elements, whose processing is almost completely controlled by China. The game is the same, it's just the pieces on the board have changed. Ultimately, these 80-year crisis periods, these fourth turnings, they are immensely destructive. There's no doubt about that. They tear down old institutions and wash away old certainties. But, and this is the key, they are also intensely creative. The American Revolution created a republic. The Civil War forged a new unified nation. World War II built the international order that, for all its flaws, has more or less kept the peace for 80 years. And that brings us right here to today. The post-World War II order is clearly breaking down. You can feel it. History suggests that something new is going to be built from its ashes. So the real question, the one that's going to define our era, is this. As the old rules collapse, who gets to sit at the table and design the rules for the next 80 years?